Well, just a few short, agonizing years of waiting after the Analogue Duo was announced, here we are. I've had it for about a week now, and I've put it through its paces, and even upgraded the firmware to the current version of 1.1b, which I think is important to note, because most reviews that are up on this thing don't include that. As of now, you can still order the console on Analogue's website, so make sure you watch this before picking it up, especially if you're currently on the fence. The Analogue Duo is touted as the be-all, end-all long-term solution for the TurboGrafx and PC Engine community, especially those of us that want a modern way to play our real games with real controllers on real TVs and not deal with the hassle of maintaining decrepit hardware or the legal ambiguity of emulation. So does it accomplish that? Well, we'll get into that. First, let's go over the console itself. It's pretty nice overall, with a nice form factor pretty similar to the original Duo, but modernized with some nice features, including 2 USB ports on the back, HDMI that outputs 480, 720, and 1080p, and an SD card slot on the back for firmware updates and perhaps other things later on. And on the side, you have an original PC Engine controller port, 3.5mm headphone jack, and volume control for that, and a syncing button for modern wireless controllers. And the front has your 2 slots that accept both the HuCard games and CD format games, just like the original Duo. The card slot is big enough for Street Fighter II and other fat cards, but not quite big enough for the EverDrives, which is a little annoying, but most should fit after taking their shields off. The CD drive also works well enough, though I wish it spit the discs out a little bit further. NEC had the right design with the original Duo. There were less moving parts to break. Analogue's Duo is definitely a sleeker design as a result of the switch to these little slots, but I always prefer function over form personally. Well, only time will tell if the CD mechanisms will last, but given Analogue's track record, I'm inclined to give them the benefit of the doubt on that for now. The big thing I really like here is the 2 USB ports on the back. This opens the door for a lot of possibilities down the road, which is a good thing. Although I do wish they had provided a little bit more of an olive branch to those of us that have North American TurboGrafx controllers. I guarantee you there's a lot of folks out there that are going to buy this, try to plug in their North American controllers, discover they cannot, and then rightly get annoyed that they now have to go buy something else. Analogue seems to recommend using the 8-bit Do controllers every chance they get, and I think I ultimately agree with that as the superior option. But having an extra port for the original turbo pads, or at least including one of those little adapters with the system, would have been nice, especially for the $250 price tag. Now, I happen to have a couple of these just lying around, but I'm willing to wager a lot of people who buy this won't. So that's the system as it stands. Overall, I like it, but I don't love it. It's alright, and with a little finagling, you can probably do 99% of what you'll ever want to do with it, which is what matters most. Alright, so let's get into the nitty-gritty and test some stuff. As far as game compatibility goes, I don't have a whole lot to say. The Analogue Duo so far has run every game I've thrown at it. Japanese or North American, CD or card, no issues. Even the handful of repros and homebrews that I have all work fine, even burned games. And this is where that FPGA technology comes in, I suppose, as the system is designed to detect games just like a regular Duo would. Also, like a regular Duo, none of those pesky system cards are needed. All of that extra RAM is built into the console, although you do have the option to select certain system cards on the OS level if you want. Should be good to just leave this on auto though, that's what I've done. Older EverDrives are not officially supported as of yet, but you can get them to work. After playing a regular game, closing out of it, and then swapping into EverDrive as you select the game from your library again. The system will think you're playing that game again, but you're actually not. And I don't necessarily recommend doing this though, because if it's not supported by Analogue, there might be a reason for that. So, I don't know. Do this at your own risk. So, overall, compatibility with games is pretty excellent. Games of all types are detected by the system and run with no hassle. And that's great, but one thing that did bother me is that some of the sound effects are a little bit off. And I don't think I'm a highly skilled enough audio engineer to really diagnose the problem, but to my ear, it seems like maybe one of the sound channels is just too low. Not sure. The 1.1b firmware update does supposedly address some kind of sound balancing issue, but to my ear, some of these sound effects are still just off. Here's some examples. So as you can plainly hear, something is definitely missing in some of those sound effects, but at the same time, I don't detect this issue in any of the music throughout the library. So I'm not sure if it's a sound channel or if it's just something specific with the sound effects. Beyond my pay grade, but either way, Analogue should fix that, or at least give us the option to tinker with the sound channels ourselves, like RetroArch does, which is free, by the way, not $250. Overall, I'm very happy that every game I tried worked. They just need to iron out whatever that is. Games also look fantastic right out of the box on default settings, and seem to more or less run exactly how they would on an original system, which is important. How about controllers though? Well, it's not quite as clear-cut here. In my experience, original controllers get mixed results with their turbo switches. I came across multiple instances of turbo switches not giving me the right speeds, randomly changing speeds throughout games, and sometimes just not working. At first I thought maybe it was just my old-ass controllers, just not playing well with modern hardware, but I got the same problem out of my Hyperkin Specialist and old-school Turbo Pad, both of which are from completely different companies and not that old. This is something that I consider to be inexcusable for a $250 FPGA system. Now there is a workaround. You can put the system in pass-through mode, which makes the original controllers behave as they should. But now you can't use any of the modern features or even access the OS at all. Restarting the system will undo pass-through mode and reintroduce the controller issue, so as of now, the Analogue Duo basically makes you choose between playing with your original controllers as intended by the developers, or having access to any of the modern features that you paid $250 for. And I find that to be problematic, especially considering Analogue's Mega SG, an older and cheaper device, doesn't have this issue and didn't have it at launch. Now, the Duo is compatible with the TurboTap, so if you've got enough regular controllers, you can have group sessions of Dungeon Explorer and Bomberman 93 as intended, right off the Hue cards. In fact, you can even mix and match regular controllers, USB controllers, and wireless 8-bit Do ones, and games with multiplayer will recognize all of them in any combination. Until, that is, you introduce the TurboTap into the equation. If that's plugged in, the Duo recognizes it and makes it the only way you can use multiple controllers, which isn't a huge problem, I guess, but it's worth pointing out. Logic would suggest that the USB turbo taps included with the TurboGrafx 16 Mini should also work, since those controllers do, but I don't own one of those turbo taps, so I can't confirm that. In my experience, I think the wireless TurboGrafx variant of the 8-bit Do controllers are a nice option. That's clearly the one that Analogue wants you to use, and it works well with no discernible lag, easy pairing, and a really long battery life. I will note one thing though, and it's that the turbo buttons on these aren't exactly the right speed by default, but you can alter the turbo speed on them by holding down the select button, button 1 and button 2 for 5 seconds. The amount of flashes the little blue light gives you tells you what level of turbo you're on, and in my estimation, the 2 flashes are about on par with the 3rd position of the original turbo switches. It's not exactly the same, but it's close enough. Now, if you just prefer having actual switches, and why wouldn't you, the USB controllers from Hori that came with the TurboGrafx 16 Mini are still good options. These aren't as nice as the 8-bit Do ones, or even the Hyperkin Specialist in my opinion, but they're alright. And it's the same size as the original controllers, unlike the 8-bit Do ones, which are a little bit smaller. So choose whichever one of these two seems most appealing to you and go with God. And feel free to experiment with different controllers. It seems like just about everything from 8-bit Do should work, and it even works with PlayStation 3 and 4 controllers, which is nice, but you don't have any turbo function with those, at least not any that I can find. Alright, now let's talk about this OS. Coming off of the Mega SG, which gives you tons of options and extremely granular control over just about every aspect of the experience, the OS on the Duo feels extremely bare bones in comparison. Apparently it's the same OS that they used on the Analogue Pocket, which makes a lot of sense with the text being as big as it is, but why they wouldn't just resize that for TVs, or at least just give us the option to resize it ourselves, is beyond me. It is what it is, I guess, at least for now. Now there are some nice filters here to mess with, including some great scan lines and Trinitron features that look really good to my eye, although they do dim the image a little bit, which I guess is inevitable, but because of that, I generally don't mess with them. You even have a Turbo Express filter if you want it to look like this. In my opinion, the light scan lines and soft edges go a pretty long way to recreating the dithering that these games had on regular CRT televisions. But you can go quite a bit further than that if you want, which is nice. You can also change the general sharpness, which I appreciate, with +3 being extremely sharp, +2 being slightly softer, +1 being kinda similar to maybe some kind of bilinear filter, and 0 being a bit too blurry in my opinion. +2 looks like the best balance to me, but your mileage will vary, and I think most will have an option here that they like. As far as color goes, you can switch between RGB and composite palettes, and I like both. RGB really makes the colors pop and looks really nice in most instances, but composite definitely looks more accurate, so if you're going for authenticity, this is the way to go. Also, if you're playing on an OLED or some other type of screen that already has a lot of vibrance and color saturation, I'd recommend composite there too. You don't want to overdo it. Either way though, having the option is nice. There's also an option to cut out the overscan zone, which can sometimes have distracting glitching and garbage pixels in some games. I like that this feature is included, but I also kind of feel like it's poorly implemented here. First off, it's a bit too aggressive. It takes way more off of the image than I think it needs to most of the time. I'd prefer to have a little bit of control over how much of the screen gets cut off. Another thing that's missing is the thumbnails in your game library. You might have noticed that big YouTubers that got review units of the Analogue Duo had pictures of their games in their library. Well, you won't. Those reviewers got souped-up SD cards included with their units that apparently had pictures and everything on there to make it work. Yours will look like this though. That's not deceptive at all. As far as I can tell, Analogue has provided 0 instruction on how to organize pictures on your SD card to get them to work yourself. I even emailed them about it a few days ago, and so far, no response.
Cool.
So with all of that said, I think it's pretty clear that the Analogue Duo is a bit more of a mixed bag than I was expecting, and if you're an owner of their previous consoles, you might feel a little surprised too. Given that, I'm not entirely sure how I should characterize it on the whole. It's definitely not the slam dunk it should have been, but it is still the most convenient and comprehensive way to play your original TurboGrafx and PC Engine games outside of resorting to emulation. That's not saying much, of course, as our options for playing these games in a modern and affordable way are quite limited, but out of all of the different routes that you could take, I think the Analogue Duo has a really compelling balance of authenticity and convenience. It's not difficult to set up, and it will play the vast majority, if not the entirety, of your library with little to no fuss. So my recommendation comes with a couple of asterisks. If you don't already have a library of actual games, I'm not sure if this is the right way to go. If a jailbreak surfaces, that could change, but as of now, I don't really recommend it if you're starting from scratch. Unless you're going with an EverDrive, I guess. I also don't recommend it if you're an ultra purist. While the occasional inaccurate sound effect and wonky result with OG controllers aren't deal breakers for me, they definitely feel out of place for a $250 FPGA console, and I could understand some folks holding off until that's fixed. Outside of that, I think it's a worthwhile investment if you already have the stuff you need and just want a reliable stand-in for your original hardware, especially if you've grown tired of fiddling with converters and adapters and special cables and maintaining these increasingly feeble machines. That's pretty much where I'm at. And I also think it's important to remember that this system has a ton of untapped potential. While it's not cheap, it is certainly cheaper than getting an original console and having it modded. If we can get those save states and those library images and some fixes to the other issues I encountered, this would immediately become the true long-term solution for a lot more people. The ball is in Analogue's court on that though. So those are my thoughts on the Analogue Duo. Let me know if I missed something down in the comments, and if you intend to get one, and why or why not. But until then, as always, thanks for watching.